a bottle laying right at the edge of the water, and she picks it up and starts to brush it off to see what it is, and a genie pops out. The genie says to her, I can grant you 3 wishes, but whatever you ask for, the person you dislike the most in the world will get double what you get. So consider that when you make your wishes. She said, okay. I don't like this at all. And he says, I don't make the rules, lady. 3 wishes. They get double. She goes, I'll take $1 million. Boom, right in front of her. Pile of cash. Her boyfriend, hours away, ex-boyfriend. Boom, $2 million cash. He has no idea where it came from. She said, for my second wish, I want the most expensive diamond bracelet ever made. Boom, right there. Diamond bracelet sitting on that pile of cash. Boyfriend, 2 of them. So she says, so he gets twice the amount of everything I ask for. And he said, yes. If that's confusing to you, think about it this way. He gets double, or you get half of what he gets. And she said, okay. Then for my last wish, genie, I want you to scare me half to death. Now that's a made-up story. But we've all been in situations where we've been hurt by somebody else. And if we could have a genie grant us a wish in a moment of great pain, we may have wished for something very similar. It's our human nature that when we experience hurt and pain from another person, to want to retaliate. We want to hurt the people that hurt us. It's deep in our human DNA, this anger and bitterness that will build up when we are hurt. We hear people say that hurt people hurt people. We want revenge. We want the people who inflicted pain in our lives to suffer. Not even at the same level. We want more suffering on them. We want them to pay for what they did. We want to punish them for the pain they've caused us. We've all experienced this. And here in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is going to talk about retaliation. And I think the text that we look at today and the text we look at next Sunday are probably the 2 hardest texts in the Sermon on the Mount to accept, because they're so counter to our human nature, and Jesus is so clear on where he stands on retaliation, and then next week about loving your enemies. So clear. Because anywhere in the world, it's accepted that if somebody hurts you, you're within your rights to make them pay. In one way or another. We use the terms from this text, an eye for an eye, which is what the law said in the Old Testament. We use this to justify our own retaliation or the retaliation of somebody else. You deserved that. They owed you that. It's an eye for an eye. It's a tooth for a tooth. But where Jesus goes with this, where his standard is, what he's calling us to is difficult, not easy, very hard, but not impossible. So let me read to you verses 38 through 42, and then we'll go back and we'll break them down. So this is what Jesus says. He says, you've heard that the law says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Let me pray. Father, we thank you for this time and this place that we can gather. We invite your presence here. Lord, may we experience you now. May we hear from you. May you encourage us with your word, and may you convict us with your word. But ultimately, may you change us. May we be more like you and less like us every minute of every day. Thank you for loving us enough to do that. It's in your son's name that I pray. Amen. So Jesus, as he's already done, this is the 5th time in the Sermon on the Mount where he contrasts what they had heard, what the Old Testament law said, and what it really meant. Jesus is illustrating, he's illuminating what the spirit of the law was, because the Pharisees, the religious leaders, had perverted it. They'd taken stuff out of context and made it what it was never to be. It wasn't to be just rules to follow. God just doesn't want us living our life with a checklist of things we do and don't do because he said so. He wants us to desire the things that he desires. He wants our hearts to be motivated to do the things that please him, not just do the things that please him. And he's addressed this with the adultery and with the divorce and the heart, the anger, the murder, what's behind it. It's not good enough to just not kill somebody. If you want to kill him, that's the problem. Whether you follow through, the problem started back here in the heart. So there's this law that God gave them, that the crime and the punishment must fit, that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that it can't be greater. And this law was given to the judges, not to the general population. It was to give them some sentencing guidelines. When people came to court because they had been injured, hurt by somebody else, what could they do? It was to deter revenge, retaliation, retribution, just like divorce was. There was an out for divorce. God gave them this to control it. And same thing with retribution. He gives them this law to try to control it. Because what happens when we're hurt is we want to take the law into our own hands. And that's very dangerous. So he creates this law and gives it to the judges so that the sentence fits the crime, that it isn't more, it wasn't exorbitant. We see this in parts of the world now. I still believe in Iran, if you're caught stealing, they cut off your hand. But the crime doesn't match the punishment. So to keep people, because our human nature is, you hurt me, you owe me, you're really going to pay. It's not a one for one. It's not an eye for an eye. It's not a tooth for a tooth. It's, if you cost me one eye, I'm taking both of yours, plus some. We really want to inflict the pain back. So he creates this law and gives it to them to control it. That the crime had to match the punishment. And the punishment had to match the crime. So that judges and people couldn't over-punish, and there would be this, leniency where some people would be punished and some people wouldn't, and this guy got this and this person got that, but to create some consistency. We have sentencing guidelines now in our court system. It's not arbitrary. They're written out. They look. They want to make sure that the crimes that are committed and people are found guilty of, they've confessed to, that these are the parameters for the sentencing. And then the judge uses his discretion or her discretion to decide within those parameters what is it, so that the system should be fair. And it's the same thing that happened here. And so God gives them this law to discourage retribution, retaliation, vengeance outside of the law. That here's an avenue. You can come in. We're not taking the law into our own hands. It creates a very dangerous society. But we trust, even now, today, that we're all law-abiding citizens, and we get some sense of security from that. But the Pharisees saw that law, and they twisted it, they perverted it, and they made it into, you, because God said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, you have the right to seek revenge. Took it outside of the court and made it something that the public, the general population, could do themselves. And the justification would be, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. God said it. They hurt you. They did you wrong. They owed you. It's your right. And rather than it being the exception, they made it a rule. They were encouraging it. Like, here, this is what you do. You got hurt. You got to get what they owe you. You can't let this slide. You can't let it go. They were encouraging personal revenge, personal retaliation when people were hurt. And you could see how quickly this gets perverted and how unhealthy of a situation it creates. So Jesus is going to address this, and this is what he's doing. Because what happens with retaliation is it escalates. You hurt me, I hurt you. Now you're hurt, you hurt me back. I hurt you back. And every time we're adding a layer of pain, of expense to the retaliation. In a not painful way, I read about two brothers, one in Chicago, one in California, and it started this kind of a light retaliation with a birthday card that one sent the other one. And it was a little offensive, funny. So the next year, he sent something back. And it got to the point where they were sending each other birthday gifts. Like one brother sent the other brother to his house on the day of his birthday party when his family was throwing the dinner for him, 2 busloads of cowboys that he hired to just show up. And then the next year, one brother sent the other brother a 4-ton boulder that he had delivered to his front yard and said, "You loved your pet rock so much as a kid, I wanted you to experience it again. Happy birthday." So the next year, that brother who got the rock sent 8 tons of pea gravel to his brother's house and had him drop it in his driveway and said, "Things are great with my pet rock. As a matter of fact, she had babies. I wanted to send them to you." And the last one that they recorded was 8 tons of cow manure in the front yard. But every year, they were trying to one-up each other with their jokes, with their birthday gifts towards each other. But this is what we do when we retaliate, when we seek revenge. We want to one-up. We're going to make them hurt more than they made us hurt. That's how we're going to end this. We're really going to hurt them. But they're on the receiving end going, "I'm going to make you hurt now more than you just made me hurt." And it's a never-ending cycle until somebody stops. So Jesus is addressing this problem. And he says this in verse 39, "But I say," so to shed light, to illuminate the truth of the essence of the law, the spirit of the law, he says, "Do not resist an evil person." He's not denying that the person isn't evil or hasn't done evil. He's telling his followers there and now us how to deal with a person like this. And he says, "Do not resist." Now, this verse has been taken out of context a million different ways. But the word resist is a legal term. It means to engage. So do not engage with an evil person. Don't get into this back and forth with them. Don't repay evil with evil. Don't engage in any way, shape, or form. The word, as it was used then, was all retaliatory actions. Legal, verbal, physical. Just don't engage with somebody who's hurt you or is hurting you. Now, again, this can be taken way out of context. Jesus isn't telling us that we have to live in an environment where we are being physically abused or emotionally or psychologically abused. He's not telling us that we have to be punching bags for the rest of our lives, that we can't defend ourselves and that we shouldn't use the laws of our land to create safe environments for ourselves or for our family or for our kids, because he said, don't engage with them. So I guess they can do whatever they want and we can do nothing. He's talking about the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we responding to them the way we're responding? If it's vengeful, if it's to retaliate, if it's to cause pain, Jesus is going to say, no, stop. If it's for our safety or the safety of a loved one, the heart, the motivation, much different. Because he says in the next verse, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. Now we think of this, again, like as a literal punching bag. But this wasn't so much the slap across the cheek, the right cheek, which would be a backhanded slap across somebody's face, wasn't to inflict pain as much as it was to inflict insult. In that part of the world, even today, one of the most degrading, humiliating things you could do to somebody is slap them across the face. Does a slap hurt? Yeah, it stings for a minute. But it's the effect, it's the statement of what was made by the slap. This is talking about an insult. He didn't say, if somebody pulls a knife and stabs you, shoots you with a gun, puts you in physical harm, is physically bigger and putting a beating on you, you just take it. You just keep taking it. He's talking about an insult, that somebody's humiliated you, embarrassed you, degraded you. And how do you respond? He says, turn the other cheek. Because our Our human nature is, you embarrass me, you degrade me, I'm coming right back. I'm going to humiliate you more than you just did me. I'm going to embarrass you more. I'm going to insult you greater than you just insulted me. And we get into it, an insult. We used to do this as kids. Remember anybody else participate in cut down competitions where you go back and forth, seeing who could come up with, eventually somebody quits? But this is what happens in life still. And he says, listen, don't do it. Some rabbis even taught during this time that a backhanded slap across the face was worth double the penalty to somebody than just a punch out of anger. This wasn't to inflict physical pain. It was to inflict an insult, which we've all been on the receiving end, and probably most, if not all of us, have been on the giving end of as well. And he says, if this is what happens, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, if someone humiliates you, if somebody challenges you and humiliates, embarrasses, turn the other cheek. You let it go. You don't engage them. You don't get into the back and forth. Then he says in verse 40, if you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. So there's some reason that somebody's brought a case against us, not frivolous, because they were awarded, as Jesus is illustrating here, our shirt. Society would say, that's what the judge said. You were found guilty, or you confessed, whatever. You're found liable, and you were told to give this amount. Just give this amount. Nobody's expecting any more. And Jesus says, give your coat too. And you think about it, in this environment, in this time, in this culture, people didn't have the clothes that we have, closets full of clothes. For some, this would be all they would own is what they were wearing. And coats were valuable because many people slept outside. And it says here, not in this text, but in the Bible, that if you had to use your coat as collateral for a loan, that the person had to give it back to you at night, so you didn't go through the night without your coat. That's how important they were. And Jesus says, listen, if you are brought into court and the judge tells you to give up your shirt, I'm telling you my standard is above that. Give your coat. Ultimately, what Jesus is saying in these four illustrations is we're giving up our rights. We're just giving up our rights. Because we wouldn't have to give up our coat. The judge said the shirt. To go above and beyond that, it tells us that we live within the confines of the laws of our land, right? But Jesus' standard is much higher. And what he's calling us to is beyond what our culture does. And it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. And we will get criticized and made fun of and talked about because we live to a higher standard than what's expected. Because the world says, listen, if somebody insults you, you insult them back. And they don't question that. It's an eye for an eye. If they said that, you can say that. And if they say this, you could say this. And the back and forth, that ping pong of insults can go on forever. And culture's like, acceptable. That's okay. We allow that. And if the judge says this is what you owe, why would you give any more? You should be trying to give less. You should be trying to negotiate that down. Jesus says, no, you give something more valuable. Because ultimately, I think as a follower of Jesus, it's not that we can or can't. It's if we should or shouldn't. We can't live our lives by just the law of the land and go, well, I'm a follower of Jesus and this is his standard, but this is what the law says. Jesus says, no, my word, my teaching, my call, my standard is higher than that. And you have to trust me. This isn't Jesus just trying to take control of our lives, to overpower us, to do. He wants to know if we trust him enough to follow him. When culture says, you shouldn't be doing that. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you even do that? It's faith. It's trust. So if we're sued in court, your shirt's taken from you, give your coat. And then he says, if a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it for 2. People use this phrase now, go the extra mile. Where'd it come from? So in this environment, Roman soldiers could call on Jewish citizens and say, carry this. We saw this when Jesus was carrying his cross. And he was stumbling under the weight of it because he'd just been brutally beaten. And they called Simon of Cyrene out. Said, carry his cross. It wasn't an option. They weren't looking for volunteers. Anybody want to take a walk with the cross with Jesus? He just grabbed them, put them on it, and they went. And this is a very degrading thing for Jewish people because it was a constant reminder that they really didn't have their freedom. That they were under the control of a non-Jewish population, the Romans. And for a Roman soldier to call, which they would do, for a Jewish person to carry their gear, you could imagine it was 1,000 steps, is what the word translates as. That for 1,000 steps, if this was you or I, we'd be counting them down. And when we got to the end, we would drop that down and give them some kind of a stare to let them know that this was not what we had planned for today. This was not on the agenda. And now I'm 1,000 steps away from where I was doing what I wanted to do, and now I got to walk back. Jesus says, if a soldier asks you to carry his gear for a mile, go the second. You keep going. Because the first isn't an option, but the second is. The shirt wasn't an option. The coat was. Not insulting back is a choice. And our relationship with Jesus is shared, is projected when we make those choices that honor him. When the world says, why are you doing that? Why would you go 2 miles when you only had to go 1? Because that's what Jesus tells me to do. Jesus tells me to go above and beyond. It doesn't have to make sense to me. I trust him. And this is the instructions that I'm given. Why would you give more? Because he told me to. Why wouldn't you come back with, because he told me not to? It's in that place that we start to separate ourselves from the world. When we make those choices that honor him and follow his word. They were forced against their will. There are times where we find ourselves in places where we're doing things we don't want to do and we don't have a choice. And we want to just do the minimum to get out. And Jesus is saying, go the extra mile. Keep going. And then in verse 42, he says, give to those who ask and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Give to those who ask. Think about that in real terms in our lives. How many times a day are you asked for something? And how many times do we just say yes versus I can't or just no? You think about the people on the side of the road. I think about they're up by the hospital a lot with their signs, asking for change, for donations. And in our minds, we see those people and we immediately start to qualify. Well, why would I give them any money? I know what they're going to do with it. I don't know this person, but I'm making the assumption that they're going to buy alcohol or drugs with it. So we do things like, sir, ma'am, do you need food? Tell me what you would like. I will go get it and bring it back. Do you need a place to stay? I can drive you to the mission. And oftentimes, if you've ever tried that, they'll say no. And then we justify in our minds for the next time why we're not going to give. And we don't let people borrow. I mean, this is silent retaliation. You want to borrow my lawnmower, but when I needed your chainsaw, you said no. So no. I'm just going to say no to you. I'm going to say no because you said no to me. Because you didn't do what I asked, I'm not going to do what you asked, even though I have the ability to. Even though I can. Now again, just like turning the cheek and giving this requires discernment. Because we can't misinterpret this text and go, well, I have a child who's an addict. So every time they ask for $20, I just keep a roll of them on me. And I think Jesus is just waiting to see how long it's going to take till I'm bankrupt and they're dead. That's not the point of the text. It requires discernment. what is the motivation for not giving? What is the motivation for not allowing someone to use something you have? Remember, hard truth is we're not owners, we're managers. It's all his. What has he entrusted us with, and who has he brought into our life that he wants them to have something that he's given us? What's the motivation? If it's retaliation, he's going to say no. You don't say no because of something they did to you. You say yes. You give to them. And if it's out of love and it's not going to harm them or create a more harmful situation for them, if you have it to give, it's because I've given it to you and I want you to give it to them. And you're going to trust that I'm going to replace it. This is the faith journey. This is the life of following Jesus. It's all faith and trust. It's blind steps that don't make sense to us. And this is how we build our confidence in our Savior. And he calls us, he keeps calling us out and calling us out and calling us out. The more confidence we have, the further we will go in this life with him. It's just little steps of faith. I tell them, I just want people to take a small step of faith to experience what God would do. And then take a bigger step because that's what he's going to ask for next. He's going to continue to push our comfort zone. He's going to continue to push our natural tendencies, what we want, what we think, and trust that he's right, that his way is always right, that he is the truth. And our part of the relationship is just to do what he says. He's already proven himself to us. He just wants to know if we'll go where he's going. So in our human nature, we want to retaliate when someone hurts us. We want to hold back. We want to give them less. We want to hurt them more. And he says, that's not the way it works in my kingdom. Right? The Sermon on the Mount is what it's like to live in his kingdom. And it's to go the extra mile. It's to not engage. It's to give when we can. And we're challenged by this. When you think about what do we take from this? Because we've all experienced this. Where we've wanted to hurt somebody who's hurt us. And maybe we're experiencing it right now. Maybe we're in the middle of this ping pong match of the back and forth with somebody, and we're just trying to hurt each other more and more. I would say our first response needs to be to wait. When we want to respond in that moment of hurt, when someone does something to hurt us and we posture up very quickly, just don't. Wait. For some of us, we've had to create accountability in our lives. We have like the 1 hour rule, the 6 hour rule, 8 hour rule, 24 hour rule, right? I have this in my life. I have people who hold me accountable to this. Because I know if I respond in the moment when I'm feeling pain inflicted by somebody else, I'm going to say things that I'm likely going to regret. And I'm going to come at them a lot harder. Right? We bring a gun to a knife fight. We're going to win. If you're going to start, I'm going to finish. So just wait. And in that time of waiting, pray that God would show you what to do, how to engage, if to engage. What does he want you to do in that moment with this situation, with that person? Pray for discernment. Find somebody you can trust to talk about how you're feeling and what should be the right response. If it's retaliation, if it's just to inflict pain on somebody because they've inflicted pain on you, it's the wrong response for a follower of Jesus. But how and what and if does he want in a response? And we need to remember a couple of things. We need to remember that Jesus has experienced everything we will. More than we will. I doubt anybody in this room will die by crucifixion. But he endured humiliation, false accusations, lies, being whipped, having his beard torn out, spit on, crown of thorns placed on his head, and then nailed to a cross. Never retaliated. Asked for forgiveness for those that crucified him while he hung on the cross. We need to remember how Jesus responded under far greater pain than you and I will experience. We need to remember who we are in this relationship with him. That he continues to love us, to extend his mercy and his grace way more than we deserve. He's proven himself to us to be faithful. We're unfaithful. So when we're having issues with each other, we need to remember how God treats us and allow that to direct our actions. That we're really no better than each other. We're broken human beings. We need to find Jesus and then stumble together on this journey through life together. That we have no right to lord ourselves over somebody, to inflict pain on somebody because they hurt us. It's not our place. It's not our right. And we trust that God recognizes our pain. He sees it, and he'll make it right in his way, in his time. But it starts with a relationship with him. Apart from him, this won't happen because our human nature will override that. Our urge to inflict pain when we hurt will continue to grow. Our society, our culture, our world would say it's acceptable to return evil with evil. Somebody hurt you, you can hurt them. It's acceptable. Our culture, our world, our society would say it's acceptable to return good for good. Somebody does something nice for you, you can do something nice for them. Acceptable. What they would find not acceptable is to return evil with good. That's the call that Jesus gives us. That when somebody hurts you, you love them. It's unnatural to our humanness. And I would say that it takes supernatural power to do because it's just not the way we're wired. It requires the help of Jesus to do that. And that's why I said, apart from the right relationship with him, we'll never be able to live this out for very long. Paul wrote in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, he said, "My old self has been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. So I live in this earthly body by trusting in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." Paul understood this. We use the terminology in the church world a lot. We probably all have said it or heard it, that I live for Jesus. My life is lived for Jesus. But the truth is, my life needs to be lived by Jesus, not for him. I need to, as Paul says, I need to be crucified with Christ. This isn't my life anymore. If I'm going to live these out, because this is hard to do, but not impossible, but it requires his help. The first fruit of the Spirit is love. We don't even experience love apart from him. How can we extend it? We need the right relationship with him. And then we need to trust that he is going to live through us. We need to allow him to do that when it doesn't make sense. When we want to inflict pain and he says, not here and not now. And maybe never. That we endure. But through that process, he's with us. And our faith is growing in him, and we're trusting him more and more. And we're making an impact in a dark world by being the light, allowing it to shine through us. And may our lives be lived in a way that point people to him. Would you pray with me? Father, I thank you for your love. I thank you for Jesus. I thank you that through him, all things are possible. God, we know our human limitations. We know what we can and can't do alone. May we not be discouraged by our shortcomings, by our weaknesses, but may we be encouraged that you love us enough to empower us, to live through us, to do the things that we can't do if we just trust you enough to allow you to do them. So may you help us deal with the pain we're experiencing. If we're experiencing it now, if it's not now, God, it will be soon, because this is what we do. We get hurt and we hurt people. So help us in those times, God, to not retaliate, to seek revenge, to inflict pain on somebody else, because that's what they've done to us. But to prayerfully consider, God, our response. And may it be a response that makes you look good, that points people to Jesus and his love. He is our hope. We thank you for your love. We thank you for Jesus. It's in his name that I pray. Amen.